It was impossible to get out of there because I had no means of getting to a bank or ATM machine in order to take out the bail money. And I mean, I spent most of those 8 hours becoming, you know, the guide, philosopher and friend of all the sort of down and outs and druggies and drunkards and you know, sad, degraded or deranged people who actually occupied my fellow inmates of the detention centre. And of course, you know, almost all of them are black. And I'm afraid I ended up thinking that the system is racist. But they were, on the whole, much better mannered than the police. And I heard some very interesting stories, because of course I was very conspicuously the odd man out in this place, and I think most of them thought I was a lawyer, and so I was dispensing with the caveat that I knew nothing about what I was talking about. Found myself, you know, kind of being the compassionate listener and to some extent, you know, the objective counsellor. But it was a very, very frustrating time, by the end of which I was getting desperate, because you know, I didn't know anybody whom I could impose upon for my bail money, which was assessed at $1,371, which seemed to me to be an extraordinary sum for effectively crossing the road in the wrong place. But I got a lot of help from the staff of the detention centre. And I have to say, although the cops seemed to me to be, you know, well, I was going to say kind of hominid values, that be an injustice to hominids. I thought the police were profoundly culpable. I mean, I can think of nothing good really to say about my treatment at the hands of the Atlanta police. On the other hand, the guys in the detention centre have a really tough job, because they're spending all their time in this horrible place, trying to preserve some kind of order in a mad what's bedlam, you know, and most of the people who go there obviously shouldn't really be there. They should be dealt with in some, I don't know, some way which might do them some good, because most of them are there because they're drug addicts, or they're down and outs, or they're slightly mad. So the people looking after them do have a very tough job, and I thought they did it with humanity and professionalism. And they were very kind to me. Sergeant Deabury, who became a good friend of mine, you know, saw at once that there was something wrong about my being there. He said to me, "You shouldn't be here." And they were very generous. They let me make as many phone calls as I wanted. All that, I think that's strictly against the regulations. And eventually they got down a very nice administrator from, you know, sort of upstairs, Mr. Jemison, who came down in his coat and tie and took compassion on me. And they really did their best to help, but eventually there was no way of raising my bail, in spite of my getting in touch with you know, one or two friends and colleagues, but you know, no one could produce that money apart from anything else. And it doesn't seem to be an ATM machine in downtown Atlanta that can dispense that much money. So it was hopeless. The only thing I could do was put myself in the hands of a professional bond agent. And eventually I got out, you know, an hour and a half late for my evening appointment. But by that time, you know, I had been through pretty much every imaginable degree of despair, and my ordeal, of course, wasn't over, because I had charges against me which are very severe, known in the state of Georgia. Jaywalking is a criminal offence, and I was charged with a failure to obey a police officer and obstructing the police.
Are those felonies?
I think so, and I would certainly have been liable to deportation. I think my chances of the green card, and therefore my livelihood, would have been destroyed. So I was extremely worried. And via the British consulate who'd sent an official to visit me in the detention centre, I got in touch with a couple of lawyers in the morning, but I was due in court at 10 o'clock, so there wasn't a lot of time to get professional legal assistance on that. I mean, the legal advice I got was actually mutually contradictory. The best solution, according to the lawyers, was to initiate a lawsuit against the City of Atlanta, because they said that would force them to withdraw the charges. But when I was sitting there in the court, and I must tell you that Pat Manning, Vice President for Teaching of the American Historical Association, came and kind of held my hand. It was very tremendous moral support, and he gave up his morning to helping me, and so did Charles Cavalieri, my editor with Prentice Hall, who is responsible for anything of merit that this book has. I mean, I did the bad bit, I wrote it. But you know, they came with me, and that was some help. But obviously, you know, I was tortured inside by the fear that I would end up with a criminal conviction, honestly through no fault of my own, and completely contrary to everything in my character and my record. And I just didn't know really, up until the moment the judge called me before him. I really didn't know what to do. But I had watched the judge in action, Judge Jackson. May I recommend anybody, you know, listening to this interview, if ever they are in trouble in Atlanta, try and get judged by Judge Jackson, because I watched him in action. I saw various, you know, other people up before him, serious traffic accidents, things. And I could see that he was a man of humanity, of humour, of good sense. And I didn't want to sue the City of Atlanta. You know, I didn't want to go to the trouble or put other people to the trouble of producing affidavits and testimony on my behalf, because I knew that a lot of members of the association had seen the extraordinary and excessive violence that the police had used against me. Indeed, one or two people the previous evening, when I got out of Choky and returned to something more like civilization, had, you know, come up to me and said, "For God's sake, it was you, we saw it all, we'll testify, we'll give you affidavits." And I realised that, you know, that would all be possible, but you know, one of my aims in life is actually to avoid giving trouble. I didn't want to do all that, and I didn't particularly want the satisfaction of suing the City of Atlanta. But I had noticed that the judge was a reliable person. I'd also noticed something which I thought would get me off if I needed it, which was that the wording of the citation was different from the charge that the judge read out. So I reckoned that if all else failed, I would be able to get the case dismissed on those grounds alone. However, really as soon as I started talking to the judge, it was pretty obvious that he realised that an injustice had been done here, and that what I characterised as a horrible misunderstanding that got out of hand was exactly really what had happened. And the prosecuting authorities, who I think are called the solicitors in the United States, here in the United Kingdom would be called the clerks of the court. You know, there were two women who seemed to be the representatives of the prosecuting authority in the courtroom. And really, you know, I had hardly been talking for 30 seconds before the attitude of these officials changed very considerably, and the two people from the prosecuting authority took the policeman who was bringing the accusation aside and had some words with him, and immediately proceedings were interrupted, and I, with Pat and Charles at my shoulders, went out with one of the prosecutors to the corridor outside the courtroom.